Thank you very much, Laskin Call, and apologies to the House for being late. The horse and greyhound racing industries occupy a key position in the Irish sporting and social landscape, and we as a nation have a strong affinity not just with racing but with the social scene that's at its core. Government funding of this key industry is an excellent opportunity to yield a high return for its investment. Support for certain strategic industries is important to future economic growth and can provide widespread benefits for our society as well as for our economy. These industries receive financial support from the state through the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund under Section 12 of the Horse and Greyhound Racing Act 2001. My department makes payments from the fund to Horse Racing Ireland and to Bord na Gan. In the period 2001 to date, a total of €1.12 billion has been paid from the fund to the horse and greyhound racing industries in accordance with the provisions of the Act. The cumulative upper limit on payments from the fund provided under the relevant regulations has therefore been reached. Exchequer funding provided from the fund is pivotal to the survival and continued development of the horse and greyhound racing industries. In order to give effect to the provisions of Budget 2018, this cumulative upper limit must be increased by regulation. In order to allow my department to provide the monies allocated in Budget 2018, it is necessary to comply with the technical requirements under Section 12, subsection 13 of the Horse and Greyhound Racing Act to increase the cumulative limit on the amount payable from the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund by 80 million to some 1.2 billion. The recent Deloitte report commissioned by Horse Racing Ireland indicates that the total direct and stimulated expenditure of the Irish breeding and racing industry is estimated at 1.84 billion in 2016. The core industry comprising 914 million of this, with secondary expenditure the remaining 927 million. In addition, it is estimated that there are 15,200 jobs at the core of the racing and breeding industry or in directly related industries. The achievements of Irish-bred and Irish-trained horses abroad and the enduring influence of Irish-born jockeys and stable staff underscore Ireland's global prominence. We hold the distinguished position of being the third highest producer of foals, coupled with having the third highest number of active brood mares in the world. Government funding is crucial in order to maintain and build on our position as one of the world's leading breeding and racing nations. Government funding of this key industry is an excellent opportunity to yield a high return for its investment, leading to a flow of income right through the economy. Support for certain strategic industries is important for future economic growth and can provide widespread benefits for our society as well as for our economy. The greyhound industry is a significant industry for Ireland. It has been embedded in Irish society for decades and it is an important activity from an economic, social and cultural perspective. It provides and supports considerable employment both directly and indirectly across the country. The Irish greyhound sector has come through challenging times during the economic recession, but it continues to make a significant economic and financial contribution to the Irish economy, particularly at a local level. The Bord na Gan annual reports indicate that despite a severe recession, the industry is recovering, showing an increase in operating surplus in 2015 and again in 2016. Funds generated from greyhound racing are reinvested in the industry through contributions to prize money and grants to various bodies involved in the greyhound racing and breeding sector, as well as promotion of greyhound welfare and the regulation of the industry. It has also contributed significantly to the improved facilities now available at greyhound tracks around Ireland. Greyhound racing is an activity that is inextricably linked to the farming community, and while it is undoubtedly part of the fabric of rural Ireland, it also enjoys a strong urban support base. The Horse Racing Act 2016 introduced a range of improvements in governance and accountability arrangements, many of which derive from recommendations made by Indecon economic consultants following their review of the sector. Indecon international consultants were also commissioned to conduct a review of certain matters relating to Bord na Gan in order to assess the suitability of the legal, governance and regulatory framework supporting the greyhound industry and to identify opportunities to maximise its commercial income. In response to the recommendations made in the Indecon and Morris reports and in the report prepared by the Joint Committee on Agriculture, Food and the Marine, I have introduced a draft general scheme of the greyhound industry bill. The bill addresses the governance of Bord na Gan, it strengthens regulatory controls in the industry, modernises sanctions and improves integrity with a view to building a reputation for exceptional regulation in the sector. As you are aware, the draft general scheme of the bill has progressed through the pre-legislative scrutiny phase, and it is hoped that a memorandum will go to Government in the coming weeks requesting approval to publish the updated general scheme and to submit it to the Office of Parliamentary Counsel for drafting. I believe that this bill will bolster the Irish greyhound industry, enable it to deal with existing challenges and maximise its future potential. Horse Racing Ireland and Board Nagan face significant challenges as they work to grow and develop the horse and greyhound industries in a competitive and mobile market segments. I am nonetheless confident that these industries have tremendous growth potential with sporting, leisure, tourism and cultural appeal across a wide demographic, both national and international. The thoroughbred horse industry is a major driver in the economy, and both industries breathe life and jobs into their respective communities. Just two paragraphs.
The House's agreement.
The hugely important contribution made by the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund since its inception in 2001 has been vital to ensuring that these industries can continue to invest in their infrastructure. I believe that the €80 million allocation is vital to help secure rural jobs and sustain communities. Accordingly, I am asking you all for your support here this evening to ensure that the Horse Racing Ireland and Board Nagan receive the funding provided for in Budget 2018, and that the very important role played by these industries and the economic activity generated by them are sustained into the future. I commend this regulation to the House, and I look forward to discussing any matters arising. Thank you.
Colin Deputy Jackie Cahill, whom I understand is given 1 minute to Deputy Keith.
Thank you, Lascon Corla. Fianna Fail are supporting this Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund, and I think, you know, as a country, we have two industries which you can be justifiably extremely proud of, both our horse racing and our greyhound industry. And I think for value for money, I think this is probably some of the best money spent by our exchequer. I think it's fair to mention too that in 2016 there was 50 million contributed in taxation, in betting taxation by these two industries. And that was a significant increase, and we made amendment. There was a Betting Amendment Act in 2015 that greatly increased the revenue, and it was increased by 20 million. And I would be confident in 2017 that the taxation revenue will be increased again. And I think, you know, there's scope for us to look at the way that we have the taxation and the taxation of these two industries. And, you know, with the growth in betting exchanges and some of the multinationals that are, you know, very large bookmaking operations, I think, you know, we could look at the way that taxation is, and 1% tax is an extremely low level of tax. But if we are doing anything on the betting front, I think we have to be very conscious of track bookmakers and the way track bookmakers are taxed. And I would think, you know, I would like the Minister pass on to the Minister of Finance. I think the track bookmakers, they should get an exemption from taxation, and they use betting exchanges as well to, you know, to help boost their turnover. And they are a vanishing species at the moment, and I think we should look at the way that this taxation operates, and if we could do anything to help their survival. I think it, you know, for the whole social and, you know, the whole social aspect of greyhound racing and horse racing, the track bookmakers are an integral part of that. And they bring in a unique perspective to the events. And I think if we lost them and go to a total monopoly, I think we'll lose a huge part of the industry and a huge part of our heritage. And I think, you know, we should definitely look at ways of helping these track bookmakers to survive, as well as the small independent bookmakers that, you know, are getting scarce in numbers as well. I think we have to be imaginative about the way that we get revenue from taxation. So I think, you know, there is loads of scope there for revenue coming in from these two industries. And, you know, I suppose in the recession, the drop in revenue was very substantial. But I think, you know, I can see in the very near future where what the Exchequer is putting in and what is we gain for taxation will be on a level par. Minister, you mentioned the Greyhound Bill, and, you know, I think this bill is absolutely essential for us, and the greyhound industry needs this bill urgently. And just, you know, we have different controversies about, you know, dogs being found with this substance or that substance, and it is doing the reputation of our industry unknown damage. And we need a bill to be introduced as quickly as possible, that the integrity of the industry can be defended and defended robustly. And if people are losing prohibited substance, there should be ways and very stringent ways of dealing with that. And the long delays there is between we hear of a dog reported found with a substance and being able to bring in fines or sanctions just has to be changed. So, but Minister, I would just on those comments I will pass over to Deputy O'Keefe.
O'Keefe has a little over a minute.
Minister, I'd like to thank you, and also I thank your journalist, Minister Andrew Doyle, for the work you've been doing, and we welcome your proposal in providing funding for the horse racing industry and the greyhound industry, for that matter of fact. You know, you're going to have critics. People see this as money badly spent, but you must remind them, and as you said yourself, you know, the amount of jobs that's created, it generates tremendous revenue that can be, which is taken up by the exchequer. Listen, we have the traumatic year in the greyhound industry. We see the closure of Hall's Cross, which was a sad event. But I must say, you know, that hopefully the greyhound industry can move on from that. We can secure the main tracks to be kept open in the country. And Deputy Cahill touched on a valid point there. You know, we accept on bookies, or not bookies, but that betting tax will have to be increased down the road. But in support of my colleague Jackie Cahill, we would ask, you know, that you put in some proviso in the legislation that would minimise the effect on on-course bookies. They are an invaluable service. They are part of the commodity of why people go racing on the track, you know, to keep crowds there. They create the banter themselves, as you can often see on TV. So it's important that we look after our on-course bookies. Many of them are sole traders. So, Minister, with that, I thank you for that. And if we're moving forward in regards to funding for horses, don't forget the trotting, which has become an increasing sport again, like horse trotting has become an increasing sport and in both recreation and as an activity, horse trotting racing. Thank you.
I'm going to move on to Sinn Féin slot, 5 minutes, and they call on Deputy Martin Kenny, who's sharing his time with Deputy Ferris.
Thank you, Laska. Minister, the horse racing industry has been in on many occasions in front of us, both at committee and we've often debated here. And the amount of money that's spent, €80 million on these two industries, is a huge revenue investment from society in a particular industry. And we all understand that, you know, we have to invest in order to reap a reward at a future date, and plenty has been made of the amount of return that there's given for that. Now, it's clearly open to a lot of discussion, because there's very many people that feel that the amount of support that the horse racing industry receives to a sector of society which, you know, let's face it, is a very much a club for very rich people. That's how it's seen, by and large, in a lot of areas of society, and that there isn't enough done to help those at the other end of the scale, at the bottom end of the scale. And plenty of us know, I come from a rural community, and we all know people who are involved in having a couple of owl nags and trying their best with them and all the rest, and failing all the time. And that's something that I think there has to be some bit of support put into. That support isn't put into in general for them, and I think that's something that needs to be looked at. The amount of money that goes into the horse racing industry, and when we see, and what struck me more than anything else was last year when we looked at it, and we seen that the revenue that the government was given, and where a lot of that revenue was ending up, was in the prize money. And when we look at any of the big race events that happened around the country, and we see who walks around the ring collecting that prize money, I don't think it is good use of public money. And that's simply the bare fact of it. Now, until there is an awful lot of, I think, reform in that whole industry, I don't think we should be putting this kind of money into it. And the only way we as an opposition party can, if you like, protest at what has gone on in respect of that is to stand up here and say that we do not support the amount of money that's been put into the greyhound and horse racing industry in the context of what has gone on and continues to go on. And, you know, we've talked about bad management and all that, but it goes a good bit further than that. It goes a good bit further than mistakes being made. A lot of these things that are happening are intentional things that are taking place in order to enrich a small sector within that industry, and we feel that is wrong and needs to be named and stood up to. Also, in regard to the greyhound industry, the testing of dogs and the doping of dogs and all that's going on around all that, it just is obscene that it's continuing all the time. You know, we were out there at the gates, and I remember someone mentioned Harold's Cross, and I remember there was a whole lot of people out there with their greyhounds protesting about Harold's Cross being closed down. You know, and that's another example of a sector of the industry which simply is not working right. You know, and we have reports, and we have this, that and the other coming up, but at the end of the day, there's nobody putting them into line. So, Minister, I suggest that until we can ensure that these things are done properly, that we should not be supporting this.
Good last caller. Minister, coming from North Kerry, an area where an awful lot of people, greyhound breeders and so forth, have contributed hugely to the economy of our areas, and indeed further afield. And the whole social side of it, the greyhound track of it in Tralee of a Friday night or Saturday night, and the tremendous community and social side that there is to that. It's sadness really that I'm raising the issue here around the greyhound sector. I can't, and I have been lobbied by small greyhound breeders who are absolutely disgusted and feel let down for the lack of regulation, a lack of proper policing and testing within the greyhound sector. We have a greyhound that has tested 3 times in 4 weeks for cocaine, and the owner took the case to the court and won his case. That dog was allowed to run, and that trainer and our owner was allowed to compete without any sanction. So that's wrong. And what's happening here is the small man can't compete with the big man. The big man has obviously very experienced personnel that's able to find a way around and to buck the system. And essentially that is what happened in several occasions. The reputation of the greyhound sector, it's not today or yesterday we know this. This is going back for considerable time. And nothing has been done by successive governments to try and bring a proper policing and testing within the sector. And more importantly, sanction. There is no sanction. Like, if a trainer can put a dog in and win 3 high-value stakes over a 4-week period, and that dog tested each time positive for cocaine. So, like how can anybody have any confidence, or how can anybody allocate money to a sector with that is ongoing? And this is coming from the small breeders, the man or woman that has their 5 or 6 dogs, they breed them, and they bring them to the track, and they try to win a stake every now and then. In order they're competitive, and if they could win it, it could make a difference for themselves. So essentially, I think I have serious problems with it. My party has serious problems with it, and it's with reluctance that we find ourselves that we can't support this.
No, just to clarify for the House, it's 8 5-minute slot. Sorry, no, it's not your slot yet.
No, point of order. What's the point? The second minister in succession has come in to see without a speech, and we have spent long hours at business committee.
Well, it's a matter for.
No, but it's not good enough. We didn't get it. And the same with the last minister, and they have enough time. Thank you.
Sorry, it was inadvertent.
Right? No, it's it happened again with the previous minister. We need to have a lead to see what's in it.
Not a point of order.
It is a point of order.
Deputy Willie Penrose.
Thank you. Indeed, on behalf of the Labour Party, indeed, myself and my colleagues have been acutely aware of the importance of the greyhound and horse racing industry across this country in terms of economic activity, employment and leisure. And we have supported the allocation of funds to this industry over the past 20 years or so. And we do so again here this evening, supporting the funding for HRA and Board na Gun in terms of assessment. We are nonetheless eager to get to the point where there is a long-term funding structure put in place for the horse racing industry in particular, which can be achieved by pursuing the correct policies, and which will clearly mean saving for the exchequer when it is achieved. The horse racing industry's aim is to become self-financed and able to stand on its own feet without the necessity of exchequer funding, which would become available to other important areas where it can be much needed and much used. In the interim, and in particular in relation to the greyhound industry, we have engaged in detailed submissions around the proposed legislation for the greyhound industry, and we focused upon significant and important welfare issues which must be addressed in any legislative intervention. And of equal and central importance is the question of probity and integrity at all levels of the greyhound industry. Shortcomings, failures, excuses and failure to follow through and follow up in respect of investigation and inspections are no longer acceptable, Minister, nor should they, nor will they be accepted. So from our pre-legislative scrutiny debates, all stakeholders in that industry are clearly on notice that cooperation and significant improvements in these areas must be forthcoming. Otherwise, if no improvements, the funding should be reviewed and discontinued. I note the disposal of Cards Cross Stadium, Minister, and I hope the Board na Gun will not be found wanting in helping out some small rural-based greyhound tracks who kept going in very adverse economic circumstances. And in that regard, I am aware that Mullingar Greyhound Station needs some financial assistance in relation to vital infrastructural investment that they need to carry out to enable them to continue to provide vital facilities to the public and entertainment at this important track. And I trust it will be forthcoming from Board na Gun and indeed the Minister for Public Expenditure. Minister, I have raised the issue of the publication of the Indicon report and my support to the recommendations emanating from the said report, and in particular the recommendation pertaining to the Irish Harness Racing Association. They have a very constructive, responsible group of people who have already set about implementing the recommendations in a very focused way, notwithstanding the failure of the Department and the other stakeholders allocating them some resources. The Irish Harness Racing Association has made multiple requests for funding assistance and they need initial seed funding of about 720,000 initially and about 2 million for capital funding. Minister, Brexit will have serious implications for the thoroughbred racing industry and indeed the breeding industry, and it's very important in this area. In a variety of ways, the Irish racing and breeding industry is dependent on Britain as our main ex-market, and the sector is considerably exposed in the event of a hard Brexit. The horse racing and breeding industries of the UK and Ireland operate as one, with horses, trainers, riders regularly moving between both jurisdictions. And indeed, the situation, horse racing in Ireland informed us that the situation is further complicated by the fact that horse racing and thoroughbred racing has always been operated on an all-Ireland basis in Ireland. For example, Foals border in Northern Ireland carry the IRE suffix rather than the GB, and 2 of Ireland's 26 racecourses are based in Northern Ireland, with 22 fixtures run there annually. All trainers in Northern Ireland are licensed by the Irish Turf Club, and races there are staged under the Turf Club's rule of racing. Approximately 90% of runners at these fixtures are trained in the public, with horses moving on a daily basis. So a return to a hard border would seriously disrupt this movement. It's probably a very important area. The 2 countries operate as a single entity for stud book purposes. So, so they're very important. And 65% of our foals are exported, and 80% of these exports are to Britain. So it's the single biggest market for bloodstock, and of course, a huge revenue generator. And I think it was 225 or 230 million was the amount that the exported thoroughbreds generated. And 80% of this will be at risk due to trade flows following the vote in favour of Brexit. Exchange rate volatility is important. As somebody who has been very cantankerous in relation to media rights, as people know, from 2019 to 2023, the media rights will be paid in sterling. And that will be a significant risk to the income in terms of the exchange rates and all like that. So, I mean, I don't want to see Kilbeggan and Ballinrobe and Roscommon and all those small race courses losing out. I do agree with Deputy Kenny. It's no use putting a lot of this prize money in where the, shall we say, the snobby crowd are always cleaning up. I'm worried about the person down there, people like Peter Downs, people who breed horses, come and work hard. People, top-class breeders, especially in the jumps industry. I'm an advocate for the jumps industry. The crowd there who are very wealthy, they're in the flat industry. I'd look after the people who are read the real racecourse. But you know, in Britain, into funding, yes, I agree with you there. But there's 80,000 tours annually comes here to our racing industry, and that will be a threat again to unfavourable rates of exchange. And just in 2016, Irish trained horses ran about 1,500 times in Britain, winning prize money of 15.3 million. And in reverse, there was only 309 British runners here, and they only won 3.9 million. So, look, Britain relies heavily on Ireland, and indeed France, to source their racehorses, and 75% of the runners in British fixtures are either Irish or French bred. So the importance here of Brexit cannot be overemphasised in terms of this industry.
Dr. Paul Murphy.
Here we are again, another year, another €80 million for the horse and greyhound racing industry. And again, the Minister, in his speech, as far as I can tell, makes no reference whatsoever to the issues of animal welfare and issues of animal rights that are concerned here. How long can you continue to ignore the horrific conditions faced by greyhounds in this industry? Of course, I know people who own greyhounds, who love their dogs, who treat them well, etc. But I also know that it's an industry that is intimately connected to gambling and where the profit motive is extremely strong, and that unfortunately has an extremely distorting impact and results in cruel practices towards dogs. I mean, just in the last week, you have 2 very important stories in the media which illustrate the point. The first, which is in the papers today, in relation to the issue of doping, where another 2 greyhounds test positive for traces of cocaine. Every time this happens, the IGB comes out and says, no, we have a testing regime, a doping regime in place. We only think it's 1% of dogs. But all the evidence suggests that it's the tip of the iceberg. Pharmacology experts, vets, others in the industry treat the official figures with serious scepticism. Their own Morris report pointed out severe problems with the anti-doping measures in the greyhound industry, and it found that the National Greyhound Laboratory does not have facilities to test many of the drugs used to dope greyhounds. So I'd ask the Minister, when will the IGB be obliged to fund adequate levels of testing for substances in greyhounds? The other issue I'd raise is even more serious, which is the issue of export of dogs to countries which have very low or effectively zero animal welfare regulations, animal welfare legislation. I note that the Minister, in an answer to Deputy Daly on the 28th of March, said Borden Nagan advises all owners involved in the export of greyhounds to only export to destinations that provide the expected levels of greyhound care and management as defined in the IGB's Code of Practice for the Welfare of Greyhounds. I strongly endorse this view. I mean, that's all very well, but the reality is greyhounds are being exported to China, to Pakistan, to countries where really cruel treatment of dogs is absolutely rife. And that's happening. There's a story just a week ago in the British press, a woman called Kerry Ellman, who has been involved in the Birmingham organisation, and has rescued dogs which are related to dogs that were exported from Ireland, from China, and the conditions that are reported are absolutely horrific. Video footage from contacts across China, this is a quote from the Daily Mirror, give a horrific insight into how racing greyhounds are treated in the absence of animal protection laws. One harrowing clip shows a greyhound being boiled alive in a cauldron. In other clips, greyhounds yelp as they are strung up with cables and hung from a line to be weighed. Other greyhounds, reduced to skin and bone, are confined in a tiny cage. Last week, Kerry spent 5 days in Beijing to retrieve the dogs her contacts intercepted. And Kerry has been in touch with me and has provided me with an extensive list of dogs that have been exported from Ireland. The dogs are on a website in China with their original owners listed, and they came directly from Ireland. There's a list of 22 dogs here, owned by the Cliffords, by Jason Walsh, Stephen McNamara, Gerard Dowling, Stephen Dunphy. The list goes on, and I can provide it to the Minister. But these are directly exported greyhounds from Ireland to China, and it seems likely that many of these involved in the exports are also involved in exports to Pakistan and elsewhere. And so the question is, what's going to be done about this? I mean, it's all very well for the IGB to say, no, we don't want dogs to be treated in this way, but that's happening now. So when is the code going to be put on a statutory footing? When will the government stop export to states like Macau, China, Pakistan and all those with no or inadequate animal welfare laws? And when will there be an investigation as to where Irish-bred greyhounds end up?
And Maureen O'Sullivan.
And greyhounds is well known. They had the private members business some time ago, and then also a bill that I tried to bring in to ban live hare coursing. The point I would have to make is that we have far too many examples of appalling ways in which animals are treated in this country, and I do want to acknowledge the individuals, the families and the organisations who do so much in animal welfare to try and redress that balance with the cruelty and the neglect and the indifference to animals. Now, it was very positive, Minister Creed, when you signed the regulation banning the use of wild animals in circuses coming into effect on the 1st of January. And what you said was that the use of wild animals for entertainment purposes in circuses can no longer be permitted, and I totally agree with you. But to me there is a hypocrisy there, because we're still allowing animals like greyhounds to be used for entertainment, in an entertainment where they do suffer injuries and where we also have injuries to other animals. I'd like to see more of the funding that's going today to be earmarked, to be designated for welfare. I did go into to meet Bord na Gan when they were here, and I discussed these matters with them. And I do acknowledge those greyhound owners who look after their dogs, but those who don't are not being tackled, they're not being addressed. And we see that with those who are guilty or the dogs are being found to be being doped. And I do think that the funding should have a role in that. And there should be a way in which funding will only go to those who have the welfare of the animals at heart. Now, I know Bord na Gan, they have a retired greyhound trust to rehome greyhounds, but that's through a 2% deduction from all winning prize money and matching contributions from Bord na Gan, and I don't think that goes far enough. They had a very nice booklet about greyhounds make great pets, which I totally agree because I've met many of them, but the welfare of greyhounds, it's not comprehensive, because we have the evidence of owners who have no guilt, no compunction, and they're ready to sell off unwanted greyhounds, as Deputy Murphy said, to places like Macau. And the treatment is appalling. It's well documented. And as well as Macau, there are other places in China and also in Pakistan. And the owners are exporting first to Spain and to France, so they're not seen to be going directly to the Macaus of this world, but the trail is there. Animal welfare groups who trace that trail and they bring it back to greyhound owners in Ireland. They've named them, but they get away with impunity. And I do think Bord na Gan could have a role here, because, and also for those owners who abandon their greyhounds openly or otherwise to rescue centres. And we know that greyhounds are very affectionate creatures. We know about the injuries as well, and the dogs were put down because of the injuries or because they haven't made the cut. So there's a big demand on trying to rehome these greyhounds. My views on live hare coursing are well known. I don't believe that we should be doing this anymore. And we have so much evidence that we have the National Parks and Wildlife Service, ICABS of this, of what goes on at some of these hare coursing meetings, where the hares are terrorised, they're struck multiple times by dogs, they're mauled into the ground, and we are also aware that hares are being brought back into other coursing meetings. There's plenty of footage for this, and again, there's no follow-up action for those who are found guilty. And there is an alternative, drag horsing, and I would ask Bord na Gan to consider using some of their funding to look at this alternative, which has been very viable in other countries. They also had another nice booklet about we love and respect our athletes, and this was about the greyhounds. But the point I make is that, all of the greyhound owners pay their fee to the coursing club, but many of those greyhound owners do not agree with coursing. So I believe Bord na Gan should have the book to register the greyhounds, and then we'd see exactly how many greyhound owners there are who are into coursing or not, because this is public funding. The public have indicated in many surveys that they don't agree with live hare coursing, but yet owners of greyhounds who don't agree with coursing have to pay their fee to the coursing club. And then if we look at the horse racing industry, the extent of the funding there. But what percentage actually goes to the treatment of injuries, the rehoming and also the welfare? More than half of the total expenditure from Horse Racing Ireland went on prize money, and the bulk to racehorse, specific group of racehorse owners. And yet many stable staff are enduring poor working conditions, and some of them on minimum wage. I do think that there could be conditions contingent on the funding. Why the horse racing industry can't fund itself, I don't know. And then those horses who never make the grade, those who do make the grade are treated very well. What about those who don't? And the injuries that they have when told about bleeding lungs, gastric ulcers, and how much of the fund goes there? Then we also know about the money that's filtered down to hunt clubs via point-to-point grants from Horse Racing Ireland. So we look at the funding going into the industry, we look at the funding into the animal welfare organisations, they're absolutely no match, but yet they're picking up the pieces. And I think there is a hypocrisy there. We have to be consistent, and there has to be an adequate and a proper follow-up to abuse of animals.
Rural independence and Michael Hilly Ray.
And I'm sharing with Deputy Matty McGrath, he's sharing with me. Minister, could I just say one thing about the greyhound industry? I really want to put on record my support for the small trainers, the people who are greyhound men and women. They're genuine people. They never in their lives would engage in any of this activity like mistreating their animals, the drugging of dogs, any of that nonsense. They're respectable people. They're people I admire. I go to the greyhound track in Tralee. You couldn't go to a better place of a Friday or a Saturday night. It's a great fundraiser. Local community groups, schools, GA clubs, they use the facilities. People come together. It's a great place for young people to go, for children, because it's safe, and They enjoy it, and it's a great little community thing, if you know what I mean. But what I can't get my head around, Minister, is how is it acceptable that if a person drugs a dog and has that unfair advantage, that person, we all know the dog is innocent. The dog doesn't take the drugs himself. But how is it that the person who does that to the dog, if the dog tests positive a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks later, that man or that person can run that dog again? Like, it's the person who is wrong. And while I fully support the industry, 100%, and I really mean that, and I'd be behind every person that's involved in the greyhound industry. It's the small greyhound breeders, the people who love having a little win now and then. It balances their book a little bit if they get a bit of prize money. But for God's sake, tackle that unfair advantage, that what I would call the criminal element, because any person that would engage in drug a dog, that's a criminal act, in my opinion.
I too welcome the money here this evening and thank the Minister for the announcement of the extra 80 million, bringing the total to 1.2 billion. It's a wonderful industry and many jobs and people employed in it. I, like previous speakers, am very concerned about doping or any drugs being used, and that must be rooted out 100%, and we must come down heavy, because they're tarnishing the name of this good industry, a wonderful industry in my own county, Clonmel Track, and indeed the coursing, and all the pleasure and enjoyment to get, but all the spin-off and all the money and all the industry goes into it. And I would ask Deputy Murphy here and Deputy Sullivan and others who oppose to come down and see the industries that's around it. Everyone that has a dog has to have a kennel and has to have all the veterinary and all the tackle and everything else that goes with it and the foodstuffs. So I'm all for this here and I want to support it. I want to support, again, as other people have said, the amendment in 2015 Act, the betting tax. It's too low at 1%, not too low for the small men that we see in part of the culture and heritage, the men that we meet and the bookies that we meet on the courses, the dog courses and the racing courses, and they are part and parcel of the heritage and the culture and the fun and enjoyment and indeed the banter that goes on there. And it's part of our heritage. We must protect it. I want to also support the small bookies because they must be supported. They all employ people and pay rates and everything else. I want to challenge you, Minister, to do something for the race for the small horse owners. I'm not talking about the coal moors or the big syndicates and the trainers, the rates in those places and the small trainers. They must be supported. We're talking about rural-proofing legislation. We're not rural-proofing anything at all. We're trying to destroy everything that's good in rural Ireland. Destroy it. So we must look at the rates out there. We must look at also the carry on of the big conglomerates. I call them a vulture fund now of our own in Tipperary, homegrown one. With great prowess with horses and racing and winning races and everything else. But we must look at the wages they pay and we must look at the way they're buying up and gobbling up all the land. They're no better than the vulture funds and it's a shame. While I, as I said, acknowledge their prowess in giving us enjoyment with the horses, but it's gone too far now. And then I must address the whole animal cruelty. I mean, animal cruelty across the way. And I said there's animal cruelty going on whole scale. And I challenge Deputy Murphy and all the other people that are against the coursing and everything else to come down and see the marauding gangs of criminals that are out today, tonight, lamping 5 and 6 and 10 of them with 5 or 6 dogs after one hare or anything else they meet, any kind of an animal they meet, and no ISPC or anybody else controlling it. The coursing in Clonmel, which is on the end of the month, I invite them all to come to and welcome them. We have a good festival, the end of January, almost upon us. A wonderful festival, worth 6 million to Clonmel. We want to support that and keep that, and we want the naysayers to turn their attention to these marauding gangs. But they are the people that they're always talking about and praising, and we know who they are. When a man meets 60 of them on a bridge in Golden in Ballycarron, and when he goes taking numbers and treat him with Ballyclave as opposed to him and do this to him. It's time that this mob was cleaned up. And again, I have to say, it sickens me here to my very being to hear all these people from Mr. Deputy Murphy and others worrying about the greyhounds and worrying about the hares, and they don't mind slaughtering the innocent babies. They're looking for abortion every day of the week. And I just left the committee where it's all come from and been discussed, and we can't wait to have it. Save the hares and kill the babies. It's fairly Rob Pinklon, in my opinion.
Your time has expired. That concludes the debate, and in accordance with standing orders, I must now put the question. The question is that the motion be agreed to. Is that agreed? It should tana wawer abadis ta. It should tana ganya abadis neil. Shilam gulan cash richa. The votal. The divisions respond to the weekly division time on tomorrow, Thursday, and pursuant to standing order 70 of 2.